welcome to Book World: The Great Escape. I'm author CJ Peterson, and my co-host over here is author Michael Scott Clifton. Today we're going to be talking about working with the dark side, running a good villain. Before we get to it, though, Mike, how was your week?
Well, it was a good one. We had a very tiring weekend. We had a 3-day Comic-Con at Shreveport, GeekCon, at the Shreveport Convention Center. And we got there Friday. It was a 3-day con, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Got back Sunday night. Had a real good time. Got to meet a lot of new readers and ran into some other, there's a couple of different publishing companies there. And we were talking, we got to share some ideas and things like that and some other authors and had a good time. We normally do 2-day comic cons. Those are usually the norm. We go to 1 or 2 of these 3-day cons and it just seems much longer than 3 days. Let's put it that way. But like I said, got to meet some readers and sold a lot of books, and it was a good experience. And then 2 weeks from this weekend, we will be at the Arkansas Comic-Con, which is normally a 2-day con. It's in Little Rock, Arkansas, but they are going to a 3-day con this year as well. And that's always been one of our favorite venues there in Little Rock, and we're really looking forward to it. And finally, if I had sparklers, I'd be waving around. I have completed my latest book, Pringle Prawn. Yay. And the manuscript needs a little bit more tweaking in terms of editing and that sort of thing. And the book cover is supposed to be finished by this weekend sometime. So really all that's left to be done is send it off to the publisher. And, and in my case, I'm exclusive to Amazon KU. And so my new book, Pringle Prawn, will be on Amazon as an ebook and a paperback, Kindle. I mean, eventually I'll have it like the rest of my books transferred also to an audiobook as well. But I've been working on it for a long time. Mm-hmm. Feel really good about this book, CJ. I've had a lot of, I've got a critique team that we've been with doing things now for 6-7 years now. And I've got the best response I think I've gotten on any of the books that we've done together since we started. So I really think this is going to be a really, really good book for me. It'll be a standalone novel, but it'll be part of that Hank Harper series as well.
Awesome. Well, we were on vacation last week for 10 days. We just got back yesterday, so my brain hasn't quite fully engaged from vacation mode into the real world mode. But I also have a book coming out. My book launch is September 5th at 6 p.m. Central Time. We'll be on my LinkedIn. We'll be on Texas Sisters Press's Facebook, as well as my YouTube channel. Make sure to tune in because there may be multiple authors, and each author brings a special giveaway for it, and that's me for Tested by Fire. Part of that is actually already out on Amazon if you want to look it up, and I believe the paperback is on Barnes & Nobles. I saw it this morning. So it is already out there, and it is already moving, but he may actually win it, so up to you. It officially launches on the 5th of September. Then on the 8th and the 9th, Super Hubby and I are going to be at Anime Oklahoma at the Grand Casino Hotel and Resort in Shawnee, Oklahoma. We'll be doing Anime Oklahoma that weekend, so we'll be kind of running around on the floor and stuff and having a good old time. And then the next week, we're going to be doing Brazoria Comic-Con, and that's going to be at Lake Jackson, Texas, so that's going to be more fun right afterwards. We'll be helping to run that one as well. And then we get a little bit of break, but I know some of the Magic Making Mischief crew is going to be at Anime Houston for the weekend of the 22nd and 23rd. So there's tons going on in September. Mike, your book launch, though, is
It is September the 19th.
19th at 6 p.m. for his Pringle Prawn. I will probably be joining him for that as well, bringing with him special prize, probably Tested by Fire, since that's the one that launched. But yeah, no, looking forward to it. Tons of stuff going on, so make sure to stay tuned. So today we're going to be talking about the villain. What makes a good villain? How do you write a good villain? Kind of teetering and playing around with the dark side. Mike, what do you have?
Well, there are unbelievable villains and there are believable villains.
Mhm.
And obviously, the believable villains are much more of a hit with readers. Of course, when the believability or unbelievability kind of depends a lot on your genre. When you write fantasy, as we do, you can have not just wicked people, but wicked witches, wicked magicians, wicked queens and kings, that sort of thing. So you can stretch it out a little bit. However, if you're writing in a contemporary genre, historical fiction, romance, cozy mysteries, that sort of thing, thrillers. And thrillers often lend themselves to having some really bad villains.
Mhm.
Uh, they have to be believable. And I will say that given um, given the extraordinary amount of books that have been written over the last 3 or 4 centuries, where we have some notable villains, it kind of is getting harder and harder to try to come up with an original villain and someone who nobody else has used that template, if you want to call it that, before. But um, I think it's possible to be able to take the worst aspects of people and make a pretty bad villain. So in the Janus Witch, I actually had two villains.
Uh-huh.
I had Morgana, who is the coven leader of a vicious, murderous coven of witches, but also had a contemporary villain, Mason Crick, who was a CEO of a hospital that
Mhm.
also used his position to sell oxycodone and illegally and make a ton of money off it. And so I think too, CJ, it depends on your context and setting in terms of of creating a believable villain.
Mhm. I know part of it is, can you get your reader to understand or, even empathize with your villain? If you write it well enough, you can kind of figure out, because everybody has it within them to be either good or evil. It just depends on, which side you feed. And so if you can get your reader to understand the perspective of the villain, not necessarily like the villain, but to kind of empathize with the villain and go, okay, I can see how that happened. I can see that. That's kind of that's something that's unique that not everybody does, because there's a lot of villain tropes. There's a lot of, the evil person who has always been evil, that sort of thing. But that evil person was a little kid at one point. That little kid was born at one point. It's kind of like the ethics class question. If Adolf Hitler was a baby, would you kill the baby if you knew what he was going to be? Well, how do you know that he's going to be that? Maybe there was a certain choice somewhere in his lifeline that he made that made him bad. Can you empathize? Can you get your readers to empathize with the villain themselves?
And you also have villains that can be the reader can be sympathetic to. The TV series Dexter,
Mm-hmm.
which actually is based on the series of books Dexter. Dexter is a serial killer,
Mm-hmm.
but he only kills bad people. Okay, so Dexter is really a villain, but he's a good villain. Okay, I mean, I know it's kind of a contradiction in terms, but you create a sympathetic character there who's by any other yardstick would be considered a vicious villain, but because Dexter only preys on other villains, other killers, then it creates a sympathetic setting. Um, and interestingly, again, um, with the Janus Witch, the book that I wrote several years ago, I took a vicious witch, Tressa Lane. It's one of the major characters in the story in the book, and caused her to suffer an accident where she suffered complete amnesia, didn't know that she is or ever was a witch. And when she recovered, she fell in love with a young man whose character and personality were exact opposite. He's kind and compassionate. She falls in love with him. So you have a story there in the sense, okay, you've got someone who was evil,
Mm-hmm.
who did bad things, very bad things.
Mm-hmm.
But then they suffer this accident whereby that part of their life is a complete blank and the slate's clean. And so they start, it's all like starting over again. And they can go from being the villain and the unsympathetic character to a heroine, even, and a sympathetic character. So there's lots of different ways, as you said, take, the chronology of how a villain became a villain, that you can create both sympathetic and unsympathetic villains.
Mm-hmm. George just Mukes says, "Want a good villain? I'll give you my third wife's phone number." Very cute. Yeah, there are ways to do it, and there are, like I said, there are certain scenarios and certain situations that the villain has to make a choice that's going to make them ultimately a villain. For example, in the Sands of Time trilogy, there is a little bit of a twist in there. I'm going to try to see if I can say this without saying the twist. Dr. Noah Roth didn't start off evil. He started off because he was trying to save someone that he loved and someone that he lost. So he didn't start off that way. He ended up that way because control, ultimate control controls ultimately. And he ended up following into that path. But in trying to show his softer side of stuff, it lets you see, okay, how did he get from here to here? And it's something that people can fall into. There are certain traps that, again, ultimate power corrupts ultimately, that people have to make choices for. For the, let's see if I can get some other ones without trying to reveal the twists. Because I kind of have a lot of twists. If you can figure that out, and if your reader can figure out where they're coming from and what made them that way, sometimes, it happens. Author friend, Cheryl Trent's writing about Medusa. Medusa wasn't initially an evil person. How did she get that way? Not a lot of people know that. She was not initially evil. So what threw her to that side? And so if you can understand it, I was just watching Snow White and the Huntsman, the Winter
Warrior.
Winter Warrior. Yeah. What made that particular queen go from the good, kind-hearted queen to the dark side, where she wanted to control all of these kids and take these kids away from the parents to try to turn them into soldiers and warriors? And then she finds out later, I'm not going to reveal the twist if you haven't seen it. I'm trying not to. You find out later what exactly it was and who it was that threw her to that side. And she was able to redeem herself. If you have a really good redemption story, for example, in Grace Restored series, there's a certain character who does something very, very badly, very bad. And he ends up, Nick has to make the choice of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. It's the enemy that you know. And it ends up being a redemption story for him. So there are a lot of things that you can do with your characters. And yeah, you can dabble a little bit in the dark side to do so.
I get asked at pretty much every book event that I participate in, where do you get the inspiration for your characters, which of course includes the villains, the bad guys. And I think the best way that I can answer that is the people that you run into during your daily life, your career, whether it be on the job, people that you have as casual acquaintances, just the everyday, living life, whether you see things happen or hear about things. In my case, I was a public educator for 38 years. And I was talking to my wife this morning. I've had thousands of students I saw come through that I had as either a principal or as a student in my class.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to see all kinds of people. And I think the inspiration for me, anyway, can't speak for others, isn't like a thunderbolt where you have the perfect villain just strike you,
Mm-hmm.
like with a magical touch. But it's more like bits and pieces that you put together the traits of a person. So you take something like a school bully, for example. Well, there's an unsympathetic character, right? Usually a bad guy that beats up on people that are weaker. But how can you make the bully a bully, but not your typical bully, or not your a well-worn trope? Same thing with like, for example, in the Open Portal, which is the first book in the Conquest of the Veil series that I wrote. I had a classmate of the main character, and I gave her a pretentious name, Lady Anne Golightly. And she was a bully and took great delight in terrorizing those students that she felt were her lessers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you have to give traits to a person like that, but it doesn't have to be the same thing for every single bully. You can make them unique in your way, and I think that's the challenge of a writer, an author. If you're writing and you're trying to create a bad person, an evil person, a villain,
Mm-hmm.
just don't make them the same as everybody else's. Twist something different.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that, CJ, maybe they didn't start out that way.
Mm-hmm.
So you show the evolution of how they became the way they were. Anything but just doing the same thing that everybody else does.
Well, and part of it is understanding their background. As the author, you need to know more about your characters than anybody else does. And so, for example, Tested by Fire, there is a bad guy. Bad guy has a brother. They are two different guys. Same household, same set of circumstances, but one went one way and one went the other. So how does that happen? It's that great what if question. Generally speaking, if there's two kids, one's closer to one parent than the other parent, what did they learn from those same circumstances? What makes them tick the way that they're ticking? It's usually a learned behavior from somewhere. Where was it? Was it a teacher? Who had it in for them? Was it a parent? Was it a neighborhood bully who, once they got big enough, decided, well, I'm tired of getting kicked around. I'm going to start kicking others around. What is it that makes that bully be that bully?
Mm-hmm.
Something had to trigger it. What was the trigger? Figure that out, and you figure out how your person will react to certain situations, and never go against the character of the character.
And then think of the emotions
Mm-hmm.
that you can use in creating a good villain.
Mm-hmm.
For example, jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
That's a powerful emotion. And jealousy can turn someone who ordinarily might, if not a decent or good person, at least not a bad one. But jealousy can turn, even the best person into someone who does things that only a villain would do.
Mm-hmm.
Envy, there is another emotion, that you can use in describing in formatting, or I should say, formulating your villain. So emotions, which are the most powerful tools I think an author can use in writing, if you do a good job of being able to explain what makes a villain tick, and again, what you alluded to, CJ, the reader understands that. And I think that you can make great villains just by using the emotions to turn even the most decent and best person to a to someone that is that just makes your blood run cold.
Mhm. There are emotion wheels online that you can look up, and they'll give you your exact opposites. Basically, half the wheel is
Mhm.
one, half the wheel is the other, and it goes down through the different emotions. Not everybody starts off, super angry. First, usually they're sad, and then they bump up to the next level, and then the next level. And if that emotion wheel will help you figure out how they got to where they got to. And
Right.
it helps you to figure out. I mean, there are characters whose families could disown them. They can go one or the other. They can either learn from that behavior and figure out that's not what I want to be, or is it, well, that's all that I know. Did they lose the love of their life and therefore turn bitter toward everybody? Is there
Mhm.
someone who reminds them of that and it's very painful, so they want them gone? What is it? Or do they want them to possess them? There are different things that come into play when it comes. You have to think of the psychological behind all of them. And that great what if question. What if they go this way instead of this way? What if they make this choice instead of that choice? How much, and a compass, you don't have to be too far off, but if you're even off just like one notch or two in the distance, you're off very far from your original point. So the question is, where did they start to go off course? And what does that look like?
The evolution of the villain,
Mhm.
and like you said, it could hinge on just one thing. I use Dexter as the example, and in the book and in the TV series, it hinged on his mother being killed right there in front of him by uh, I think a drug addict or something like that. But when he was a small child, and it left him, you know, the way he was, scarred him to the point where it led him to being the good serial killer instead of the bad
Technically,
serial killer.
he's a vigilante.
Yeah, although he would be classified as a serial
Evil
killer because of
vigilante.
his, yeah. But he's a good serial killer,
Twisted vigilante.
and sometimes what the line between the villain, the bad guy, and the
Mhm.
good guy is paper thin.
Mhm.
You know, and it's. I think of the western, where they had the gunfight at the OK Corral. You had Wyatt Earp. Well, if you look at this history of Wyatt Earp, he wasn't your model citizen.
Mm-mm.
He was apt to shoot first and ask questions later. So, like I said, sometimes there's just a faint line between the bad guy and the good guy, the villain and the hero, and
And sometimes
it's
it
quite
ends
interesting.
sometimes it ends up being the friends that they choose, because you are the sum of your friends.
That's true.
So sometimes it could be a matter of they accidentally got looped into this and ended up being illegal, therefore ended up going through the judicial system and ended up turning them bad. It's that what if question. What if they weren't there at that time? Where would they be now?
I got to say that Stephen King uh, is probably the best author I've ever read when it comes to creating villains. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that he's sort of a cross genre guy.
Mm-hmm.
He can write, supernatural. He can write fantasy. He can write, murder mystery. He's all over the place. But the development and description of his villains is always spot on. And I think consistently he's probably the best author I've ever read when it comes to creating villains. I was going to say,
Carrie is a good example of it. She didn't start off that way.
no, that's true. But they
She,
made her that way.
yeah, she was pushed. They made her who she
Yeah.
was. And it's like, so what choices made them who they are? Was it by their own, or was it by somebody else's hand?
And who knows what made Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw Massacre turn to what he did? Maybe he had an abusive childhood.
Mhm.
You just never know. You
Sometimes
know,
you might have to take a trip to the dark side and actually look into like serial killers and their testimonies, and because they tell you how they got there. There is an article somewhere that tells how they got there. And so sometimes you got to kind of tiptoe in the dark side a little bit to figure out, the underlying current as to what made them who they are.
what is also fascinating is when you, from a writer's standpoint, even, or I guess even from a reader's standpoint, is when you take a villain, a bad guy, okay, or girl,
Mm-hmm.
and you follow their evolution from point A to point B and beyond. And a good example of that is the Game of Thrones series and books written by George R. R. Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And in the movie, Cersei, for example, is one of the main characters. Cersei was never a sympathetic character, not from the beginning of the story, not from the beginning of the books or the series. She became evil
Mm-hmm.
from one book to the next, from one season to the next. She got progressively worse, and it's really delicious in that sense that you don't get the whole in your face kind of evil personality and cruel person right from the jump, but you can see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because the writing is such, you can see that person coming. So that's that's powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can write it that way, you're on your way to writing a very compelling bad guy villain.
Definitely. Like I said, if they can follow along with it and figure out what happened and how it happened, you can take them on the whole character arc with you.
Oh yeah,
The
yeah.
ultimate, show don't tell. Let them figure it out.
Yes.
So basically, I guess what we're trying to say in a nutshell is don't be afraid to tiptoe into the dark side.
No.
Try to steer clear of the, standard villain tropes. Figure out why your character is the way that they are, and what choices were made to get them there. Was it by their hand or was it by another's? There's a lot of things to consider when you're talking about the villains, but don't be afraid to walk on the dark side. Just saying. Might make you a little bit more of a stronger writer, and your readers will appreciate it. Next week on the 30th at 1:00, we're going to have, if I can pronounce his name correctly, Joe Congle. Is that correct?
Yep.
Joe Congle. He has PI and Detective Mysteries. So we'll have him next week at 1:00, same time, same sandbox. So until then, like I said, don't be afraid to write on the dark side. We'll catch you guys next week. We'll see you then. Bye.